Signore, signori, grazie a nome di tutta la nostra comunità per la vostra presenza dall'Accademia Britannica. Accogliervi qui stasera ci dà il più pieno piacere. Welcome everyone and thank you all very much for being here with us on this fine summer's evening to attend our fourth and final lecture in a series in which we present, our 9-month award holders present a part of the research that they've undertaken here at the British School at Rome. It's a great pleasure, a privilege, and a joy for me to be able to introduce tonight's speaker, Jessica Dalton, a superstar ascendant in the study of 16th century church history. Jessica was the winner of a first-class degree in the history of art at the Courtauld Institute and was awarded a distinction in her Masters in Cultural and Intellectual History at the Warburg Institute, two institutions which, as you all know, are pack leaders in innovative humanities research. Jessica is currently a PhD candidate at the University of St Andrews, where she is undertaking doctoral research seeking to understand why the Jesuits were allowed to privately absolve heresy in sacramental confession. She has traded in the dank Scottish climes for the Mediterranean sun to join us here at the British School at Rome on a 9-month award, a Rome scholarship, during which time she has been successfully manoeuvring this much-needed inquiry into a very exciting doctoral thesis. Part of our mission here at the British School at Rome is to support scholars who benefit from sustained access to Rome's rich research resources. So we are absolutely thrilled to have supported Jessica, who, as we will hear, has made impressive use of Roman and Italian archival treasures, as well as engaging with Italian scholarship and participating in seminars and workshops across the city. So please join me in extending a very warm welcome to our wonderful Rome scholar, Jessica Dalton, who will take us away with this rather saucy image and alluring title, Purging the Peninsula, Jesuits, Inquisitors, and the Secret Absolution of Heretics in Post-Reformation Italy.
Thanks very much, Tom. And first of all, I'd just like to say a few thank yous. I won't take too long. First of all, thank you to the British School at Rome for my Rome Award, which has allowed me to stay in the archives uninterrupted for 9 months, an experience that I'm constantly being reminded by senior scholars may be unique in my academic career. I'd also like to thank the broader academic community in Rome, some of whom, the representatives of which are here tonight. I've been really amazed by the generosity with which people have shared their bibliographical, archival, and general wisdom with me, and it's really helped this research move along and stop me from going down all number of rabbit holes. I'd also like to thank, lastly, my fellow borsisti here at the British School for the willingness or perhaps patience with which they've borne my talking about the Jesuits, possibly every day for the past 9 months. You've got about 45 minutes and then I'm going to leave the country, so, okay. Oh, okay, perfect. I don't want that, thanks. I go purging the diocese and make the world tremble, partly with justice, castigating, and partly with good. These are the words of Jesuit priest Father Nicholas Bobadilla, boasting of his missionary work in the Calabrian diocese of Monteleone. Bobadilla's strong statement betrays the fiery spirit with which the Spanish priest confronted the religious dissent that threatened the spiritual salvation and social stability of late 16th century Italy. As Bobadilla saw it, he was addressing the greatest crisis of his age, the battle against religious rebellion, the fight against heresy. To the modern ear, it might seem strange to hear a priest, a pastor, a comforter of souls, self-consciously assuming the position of a castigator, a man to make the world tremble. Moreover, the imposition of justice, castigation, and the rather ambiguous reference to good might seem almost contradictory. Indeed, Bobadilla's vivid declaration gives us some idea of the complex and multifaceted role assumed by Jesuit priests in the fight to stem the spread of heresy during a period in which religious rebellion was seen as a real threat to the cohesion of the Roman Catholic Church and Italian society. In the first years of the 1530s, Bobadilla was amongst a group of 6 young men who gathered around the charismatic young Basque, Inigo de Loyola, at the University of Paris. United by a fervent desire to serve God, in the summer of 1534, Loyola, Bobadilla and their companions stood in the church of Saint-Pierre de Montmartre and swore an oath to devote their lives to saving souls. The young Inigo would become Saint Ignatius Loyola, and that small band of Spanish, Portuguese and German students would become the Society of Jesus. Officially approved by Pope Paul III in 1540, in just a few decades, the Jesuits, as they came to be known, were preaching, teaching, and converting souls in Africa, America, Europe, and the Far East. The Jesuits' ability to adapt themselves to the diverse cultural, social, and political situations in which they worked during their global ministry was aided by their unusually loose religious rule. The rule approved by the Society allowed the Jesuits a remarkable amount of flexibility and autonomy, freeing them from obligations enforced on many other religious organizations, such as the duty to pray at fixed times of the day, to wear a distinctive habit, and to observe fasts and other forms of austerity, which would inhibit missionary activity. Whilst the Jesuits' ability to adapt to their surroundings would prove crucial for their ministry in societies far from Europe, the flexibility and novelty of the early society was also key to their success as missionaries closer to home. In the 16th century, the Italian peninsula was fragmented into independently governed political states, with varying levels of ecclesiastical infrastructure and diverse religious situations. The Jesuits' capacity to adapt their approach and ministry to cooperate with a range of secular and ecclesiastical authorities was crucial to their role, reinforcing papal authority and religious orthodoxy on a peninsula that should have been the heartland of Roman Catholicism, but was racked by the prospect of religious division and decay. Dogged and immovably devout in his obedience to the Church, in a career that spanned almost the entire 16th century, Bobadilla conducted numerous missions in Europe, often imperiling his life as he travelled across a continent ravaged by religious conflict. Bobadilla's world was tremoring in the tumultuous aftermath of the Protestant Reformation, a series of radical religious movements that had transformed the spiritual, social, and political landscape of Europe. In the first decades of the 16th century, the Augustinian monk Martin Luther denied the value of good works in man's quest for salvation, saying that we could do nothing worthy to earn our place in heaven, that we would be saved by faith alone. Luther's call to sola fide undermined the legitimacy and value of the prayers, pilgrimages, and sacraments at the core of Christian worship and European culture. This was a grave heresy, a knowing rejection of the theology and practices accepted and promoted by the Church of Rome. It was also a denial of the ecclesiastical authority that underpinned them. For those flying the flag of orthodoxy, the beliefs of obstinate heretics like Martin Luther merited nothing less than the flames of hell. As if this was not bad enough, these new heresies had a political upshot. Supported by local rulers, Luther and other reformers inspired by his rebellion put their initiatives for church reform into practice. The Pope of Rome did not figure in their plans. Until the capture of Rome in 1870, the Pope was both spiritual head of the Catholic Church and territorial leader of the Papal States. In the 16th century, the states ruled by the Pope cut a vast swathe across the centre and north of Italy, as you can see from the map on the left. As Il Sovrano Pontifice, both a spiritual and territorial power, princes across Europe formed alliances and fought wars with the papacy in the same way as they might deal with the Duke of Milan. When Luther's challenge to the authority of the Roman Church gained the support of the Elector of Saxony, and other secular leaders adopted reformed types of Christianity, the political landscape of Europe began to divide along religious lines. The map on the left side of the current slide indicates the way in which the various types of Christian practice came to dominate areas of Europe after the Peace of Augsburg of 1555 ended a period of bitter conflict between Catholics and Reformers, declaring that the religion of each state could be chosen by its secular leader. As Bobadilla travelled through Protestant lands, his life seemed imperiled at every turn. He was challenged, attacked, and sometimes chased out of places where he sought to save souls. In letters from the mission field, Bobadilla complained to his Jesuit superiors that they could not possibly understand the extent of the religious crisis that he was facing, sitting comfortably in their garden in Rome. Despite Bobadilla's comments, Italy was certainly not safe from the prospect of religious rebellion and all of its political consequences. Bobadilla's Italian missions would soon offer him direct experience of this. In the middle decades of the 16th century, Protestant precepts entered Italy on the tongues of merchants, landing at major ports like Ancona, Genoa, and Venice. Unorthodox ideas penetrated the peninsula on the pages of books and flourished in scholarly circles in universities such as Padua and Bologna, and amongst the learned nobility of cities like Modena. The map on the left side of the current slide shows the various nuclei of heretical ideas across the Italian states. The portrait on the right depicts a notable Italian Protestant, the preacher and theologian Peter Martyr Vermigli, who fled the peninsula for Zurich in 1542 and encouraged many other like-minded reformers to follow suit. The wars of religion in France and the German lands were hardly a distant reality in Italian states like the Duchy of Savoy, where the Duke would struggle in vain to regain his tenuous dominion over Geneva, a city which had thrown off its Catholic prince under the influence of religious reformer John Calvin. In Italy, there were also proponents of older heretical sects, such as the Valdensians, who forged new alliances with Protestant reformers in Northern Europe, buoying their long-established communities in the Kingdom of Naples and the Duchy of Savoy, and reminding ecclesiastical and secular authorities of the threat that they posed to the salvation of souls and the stability of society. In addition to these challenges, and intrinsically connected to them, there were widespread problems with disobedience and a lack of education amongst Catholic clergy and religious. The early Jesuits sometimes noted that they could understand why lay people were seduced by the promises of Protestant reformers when their parish priest had taken a concubine and didn't even know how to celebrate the Mass. Although scholars recognized that the role of the Jesuits was important to the Church's endeavors to stabilize the religious situation in 16th century Italy, in a narrative populated by popes, bishops, secular rulers, and above all, inquisitors, the part played by the Jesuits is often surprisingly unclear. In a scholarly tradition that has, until very recently, been dominated by Jesuit historians, accounts of the early society have often underlined the Jesuits' role as exemplary teachers and preachers, emphasizing their renewal of Catholic belief through catechesis and a fervent Baroque spirituality. Scholarship has also focused on the Jesuits' role evangelizing the New World, describing their propagation of the faith in the Indies and the Americas. Nonetheless, our understanding of the Jesuits' work for the defense of the faith, an objective that was added to the Society's formula of the Institute in 1550, is often rather confused. The story has been muddled by assertions in early Jesuit histories that underline Loyalist support for the Roman Inquisition, whilst attempting to distance the Society from potentially controversial associations with more oppressive strategies to combat religious dissent. An insistence on the Jesuits' distinctive pastoral way of proceeding and their autonomy from the early modern Inquisitions has often resulted in studies of their anti-heretical activities that look at the society in a vacuum, rather than as an organisation that engaged with other institutions and individuals attempting to address the religious crisis of the late 16th century. My PhD and the research that I've conducted at the British School at Rome relies on major works by scholars like Adriano Prosperi and Elena Brambilla, whose works on the Roman Inquisition have underlined the relationship between the ministry of the Jesuits and inquisitorial strategies in early modern Italy. More localized case studies by historians like Vincenzo Lavegna, Giovanni Romeo, and Pier Roberto Scaramella have made it clear that the role of the Jesuits went far beyond the teaching and preaching that defined their own way of proceeding. Putting the focus back onto the Jesuits, both as an institution and as individuals, my own project considers the way in which the organisation and the approach of the society allowed the early Jesuits to assume a diverse range of roles to combat heresy across the fragmented states and patchwork jurisdictions of early modern Italy. The dichotomy presented by the ostensibly contrasting approaches mentioned by Bobadilla when he was discussing his missionary work in Monteleone, castigation and good, justice and compassion, durezza and dolcezza, was central to discussions within and without the early Society of Jesus regarding the best way to deal with religious rebels in early modern Italy. On the Italian peninsula, the key representative of durezza, of justice, was the newly established Roman Inquisition. The Roman Inquisition, or Holy Office, was founded by Pope Paul III in 1542 with the bull Licet ab initio, an early commentary of which is shown on the right of this slide. The establishment of the Holy Office in Rome was a direct response to the breakdown of discussions between Catholics and Reformers at the colloquy at Regensburg, and of the infiltration of Protestant heresies onto the Italian peninsula. Founded to fight heresy through formal investigations, judicial tribunals, and the imposition of penalties, the Roman Inquisition oversaw the work of older Italian inquisitions, as well as sending commissaries to investigate heresy in specific locales and establishing some new tribunals. The presence of the Holy Office, at least nominally, is indicated on the map on the left. The Jesuits, on the other hand, emphasized their role as representative of dolcezza, underlining the value of pastoral methods as a means of stemming the spread of heresy. From the first decades of the Society's ministry, letters from the mission field regaled Jesuit superiors in Rome with the success of fathers who went into cities like Bologna and Faenza, preaching the word of God and hearing hundreds of confessions a week. They claimed to convert numerous heretics in the process. Despite their special status as public enemy number one, for the Jesuits, heretics were sinners in need of help, just like those who committed less politically charged misdemeanors like fornication or adultery. The conversions solicited by the Jesuits did not come because of a threat of judicial penalties, but were internal changes of heart, instigated using a form of spirituality developed by Loyola during his own conversion from a less than saintly, courtly life to an existence focused on serving God. This approach was systematized in Loyola's famous spiritual exercises, and the illustration on the left hand of the screen indicates the stages of the examination of conscience that was central to this Ignatian spirituality. The first finger represents a prayer of thanksgiving, the second, a request for enlightenment from the Holy Spirit. The third, a thorough examination of conscience, considering all sins committed. The fourth, feeling true sorrow, contrition for this wrongdoing. And finally, the fifth, a firm resolution to begin life again as a Christian, crushing the demon underfoot. Despite underlining their support for the inquisitorial tribunals in Spain, Italy, and Portugal, from the first decades of their existence, the Jesuits distinguished their own approach from that of the Inquisitors. When King John III of Portugal asked the Jesuits to run his own Inquisition in 1555, his request was rejected by Loyola, with sentiments that echo in Jesuit letters throughout the 16th century. The Jesuits were pastors, comforters, teachers, not judges. The apprehension and condemnation of heretics did not befit their way of proceeding. The Jesuits, in other words, were proponents of dolcezza, of consolation and compassion. Durezza and justice were the remit of the Inquisitors. Writing in 1560, the Society's second Superior General, Diego Lainez, expressed similar reserve, warning a father not to involve himself in inquisitorial matters, lest he put a scythe in another's harvest. But not everybody shared this view. Bobadilla and other important members of the early society stated that inquisitorial work was entirely compatible with their mission to save souls and to serve the papacy. As John O'Malley has pointed out, several fathers were notable for the enthusiasm with which they sought out information on heretics and encouraged lay people to denounce the wayward to their local inquisition. Discussion and disagreement on this thorny question rumbled on in the society right into the early 17th century. However, the one consistent trend is a marked caution regarding explicit public association with the Holy Office of Rome. To further complicate the picture, in late 1551, Jesuit Father Alfonso Salmeron went to Pope Julius III to request a privilege that would propel the Society's ministry as confessors directly into the world of inquisitorial Durezza. He asked the Pope to give the Jesuits the power to absolve and reconcile heretics autonomously, bringing penitent heretics back to the Church through the sacrament of confession, outside of the judicial inquisitorial system. The Jesuits had enjoyed this privilege in the lands of the infidel since 1543, and in 1550 they were granted a similar faculty for use on their German missions. However, following the crest of 1551, Julius III granted the privilege without geographical restriction, giving Jesuit confessors in Italy the power to bring heretics back into the Church during a sacrament that was conducted in total secrecy. In the territories outside of Europe and in the German lands, Jesuits using this privilege would rarely run the risk of upsetting or frustrating an existing tribunal system. In Italy, however, the potential for conflict with inquisitorial investigations was recognized immediately. Throughout the 1550s and 60s, letters arrived at the office of the Superior General in Rome from fathers all over the peninsula, fearful of stepping on inquisitors' toes, of allowing dangerous heretics to lie their way to an easy reconciliation with the Church, and worried about tainting their own position as pastors with undesirable characteristics of an inquisitorial judge. Despite this unease, the power to absolve heretics transformed the Society's pastoral strategies into an effective means of combating heresy in situations in which the forces of justice were absent or had achieved limited success. As I hope to demonstrate in the remainder of my lecture, the flexibility of the Society's organization and the jurisdictional autonomy that they could enjoy through their papal privileges allowed the early Jesuits to collaborate with the papacy, the Holy Office, and secular leaders, filling almost any vacuum in the existing infrastructure, whilst retaining an image of dolcezza that would help them to convince, convert, and reconcile heretics across the Italian states. Father Silvestro Landini, sometimes identified as the first ever Jesuit missionary, spoke explicitly of a two-tiered approach to stemming religious rebellion amongst the clergy and laity of 16th century Corsica. A strategically important island ravaged by war and long neglected by a largely ignorant and disinterested clergy, the Corsica that greeted Landini on his arrival in Bastia in late 1551 was in dire need of spiritual, ecclesiastical, and material renewal. Landini and his missionary companion, Father Emmanuel Gomez, were sent to Corsica by Pope Julius III after the Genoese bank that governed the island pleaded with Roman ecclesiastical authorities to help them with their unruly priests and sinful subjects. Landini and Gomez were working for the Banco di San Giorgio, whose headquarters in Genoa is pictured between one of Landini's letters and his portrait at the centre of the current slide. In his letters to the governors of the bank, Landini paints a woeful picture of a people whose religious practices and social behaviour had become defiled with acts of heresy, blasphemy, incest, and vendetta. The problem, as Landini saw it, was with both the people and their pastors. Although he mentions secret circles of Lutherans on Corsica, Landini emphasizes that the most widespread problems were ignorance and poverty. How could the islanders be otherwise, the Jesuit laments, when they had so few bishops and dogs and cats slept on the altars of dilapidated Corsican churches? At the end of a preliminary report on the state of the island, Landini suggests that he first tried to tackle these problems with a spiritual route: preaching, instruction for laity and clergy, and the frequent ministration of confession. This approach could bring souls back to religious orthodoxy and subjects back into social order. If this didn't work, however, they must implement justice. During Landini's mission to Corsica, he reported that sermons, recitations of the Articles of the Faith, spiritual exercises, and daily confessions brought many souls back to the church. When taught the Orthodox truth, Landini said that these people were often more pious than any other that he had encountered. Using the Jesuits' privileges of absolution, those who had seen the light under the tutelage of Landini could be officially reconciled to the church with a few spiritual penances and no harsh penalty for their wrongdoing. Further to this, the Jesuits published edicts outlining standards of morality and ecclesiastical discipline. For those who persisted in error, particularly the clergy, Landini and Gomez could call upon the territorial powers who had invited them to Corsica to enforce these standards with secular justice. In his brief for the mission, Pope Julius III had warned Landini and Gomez to avoid conflicts with any local inquisitors on Corsica. In fact, there doesn't seem to have been a functioning tribunal for examining, punishing, and officially reconciling the errant. Despite the absence of a tribunal on Corsica, documents held at the Jesuit archive and the Archivio di Stato in Genoa indicate that the negative fame of the Inquisitions had reached the island. Reports and letters written by Landini indicate that the local clergy in Corsica, annoyed at the arrival of Jesuits telling them to change their ways, spread rumours that Landini and Gomez were undercover inquisitors. These rumours were engineered to excite fear of the Inquisition and so hamper the success of the Jesuit missionaries, breaking the bond of trust that was crucial for securing conversions and tainting the image of Jesuit pastors with notions of trial and punishment at the hands of the Holy Office. Landini was well practiced in the art of conversion. Before going to Corsica, he conducted missions in Modena, Ferrara, and the outskirts of Lucca, areas heavily infected with Protestant heresy. During these missions, Landini wrote to his Jesuit superiors, commenting on the great number of people that he could bring back to the church via a spiritual route, if he had the power to absolve heresy in the secrecy of confession. Landini and other Jesuits working across the peninsula realized that the fear of an inquisitorial trial and the shame that went with public exposure was a real barrier to securing conversions of penitent heretics. For many Jesuits, it seems that their ability to absolve heretics autonomously was a crucial means of overcoming this obstacle. In September 1568, the rector of the Jesuit college in Turin, Father Achille Gagliardi, wrote to the Superior General in Rome, underlining the success that he was enjoying reconciling heretics to the church through confession. Gagliardi requested permission to extend the power to absolve heresy to another father at the Jesuit college, so that he could share the burden of the numerous confessions that he had to hear. Gagliardi writes that he is inundated by French Protestants who have been seduced by heretical preachers, but now came to him in penance, seeking absolution from their heresy. These people are not dangerous, he says. They don't need to talk to the Inquisitors, nor to make a public renunciation of their heresy, the very idea of which is a most hateful thing for them. For Gagliardi, his work as a confessor to penitent Protestants would have positive repercussions far beyond the walls of the Jesuit college at Turin, even beyond the borders of the Duchy of Savoy. In 1559, Turin had been made the new capital of the lands of Duke Emanuele Filiberto I. His Duchy of Savoy, which included the Principality of Piedmont, sat perilously close to Protestant Europe, straddling the borders of modern-day Italy and France, as indicated on the map on the left. In June of 1568, Gagliardi had written to his superior general in Rome, "More and more this city of Turin seems to me to be a place of great importance, where it's most expedient that the society plant a strong defense to resist heresy, because otherwise I have the greatest fear that this heresy will go from here, sowing itself through all of Italy." Although officially under the jurisdiction of the Holy Office of Rome, during the late 16th century, inquisitorial procedures in the Duchy of Savoy were micromanaged by Duke Emanuele Filiberto, a strong military man nicknamed Testa di Ferro, pictured here on the right. The Duke was constantly trying to extend his influence over the duchy's tribunals, regularly impeding the election of inquisitors by the Holy Office in Rome in favour of his own Piemontese personnel. Throughout the reign of Emanuele Filiberto, papal nuncios conducted the delicate task of mediating between the Roman Inquisition and the secular and ecclesiastical powers of the duchy, keen to overcome conflict and devise effective strategies to stem the spread of heresy in this perilous gateway to Protestant Europe. Despite the complicated relations between the secular and ecclesiastical powers in Savoy and Rome, in the very first years of the 1560s, dynamic Jesuit missionary Father Antonio Posavino managed to carve out an influential role as an advisor and collaborator in the Duke's efforts to fight heresy in his French and Italian lands. Posavino went to the Duchy of Savoy in 1560, after being made commendatore of the benefice of San Antonio in Fossano. Shortly after arriving, Posavino expanded his mission, meeting with Emanuele Filiberto to solicit the Duke's support for the establishment of Jesuit colleges in his territory. Posavino tapped into the Duke's fear that heresy was spreading in the duchy, promoting Jesuit colleges as a means of educating the young in Catholic orthodoxy and so quashing Valdensian and Protestant beliefs. Posavino made it clear to the Duke that as a Catholic prince, he had a responsibility to both God and himself to fight heresy, lest his lands become overrun by religious rebels, imperiling the souls of his subjects and the stability of his position as a territorial power. Cultivating a good working relationship with Emanuele Filiberto, Posavino proposed himself as an ally and a mouthpiece for the Duke at both the Jesuit headquarters in Rome and the court of Pope Pius IV. In turn, Posavino assumed a vital role in the duchy, developing and executing Emanuele Filiberto's anti-heretical missions alongside local secular and ecclesiastical leaders during the first years of the 1560s. A long detailed letter held at the Archivio di Stato in Turin, a leaf of which is shown at the centre of this slide, gives us some idea of the strategies used by Posavino and the ducal forces to combat the spread of heresy in the Duchy of Savoy. Writing about the ducal mission to convert the heretics in the valley of Angrona, 68 kilometres from Turin, Posavino updates Emanuele Filiberto on the state of Valdensian communities and their leaders. He then suggests a way that they might improve their successes, securing conversions in the run-up to Easter. With time, these heretics could come to salvation with the means of the church, he writes, or ultimately be cleansed with justice. In the same way as Landini, Posavino recognized the value of a two-tiered approach to the question of conversion. He also recognized the power of fear. Nonetheless, working amongst heretics who had largely erred by choice rather than by ignorance or a lack of pastoral care, Posavinus does not suggest that the Duke attempt to overcome fear to secure conversions, but rather to use it as a tool. Posavino writes that a military intervention would be a useful precursor to his Lenten sermons, since the terror of arms opens the ears of the proud to hear the truth, and since the time of Lent is a period in which we sow the seed of God for all. Through this strategy, Posavino hopes that the successes of the heretics might cease in favour of those who defend the faith. Far from Turin, in the Spanish kingdom of Naples, the use of justice and pastoral work in tandem, as advocated by Posavino in Piedmont, became characteristic of collaborations between the Society of Jesus and the cardinals of the Holy Office in Rome. Vital to the Jesuits' role in Naples was their ability to distance themselves from the negative reputation of the Holy Office and its associations with hard justice. In 1563, Jesuit Cristobal Rodriguez went on a mission to Volterra, a diocese in Puglia with a substantial community of Valdensian heretics. Reporting on the mission to Superior General Francesco Borgia in 1564, Rodriguez states that heresies had lingered in Volterra for decades because the papacy had been unable to establish its inquisitorial tribunals in the Spanish-ruled kingdom of Naples. After the local bishops' weak and unsuccessful efforts to quash religious rebellion, Volterra remained a nucleus of both Valdensians and Reformed heresies, and so the cardinals of the Holy Office of Rome asked that a father of the Society of Jesus go to convert the remaining dissidents. That father was Rodriguez, fresh from a successful mission saving souls in Coptic Egypt. Before detailing the success of his mission to Volterra, the number of souls converted, their newfound devotion, their processions and litanies in the streets, Rodriguez makes a rather curious statement. As your reverence knows, the company did not want the father sent by the Holy Office to go as a commissary or judge of the Inquisition, like the cardinals of the Inquisition had asked, but only to instruct, i.e. to teach, and exhort, that is, to preach. In fact, as Rodriguez writes, the first thing that he and his companion did on arrival in Volterra was to go to the governor of the city to explain that they had not come as inquisitorial judges, but were in the city to preach the truth of the faith and comfort souls, as was the role of a Jesuit missionary. As we've seen, the Jesuits were keen to distance themselves from explicitly inquisitorial work, regularly asserting their institutional and ministerial autonomy from the Holy Office. But why would Rodriguez need to tell his superior general, his boss who had sanctioned the mission, that he was not working as a commissary or a judge of the Holy Office? Was this reminder of the Jesuits' refusal to work as an inquisitorial agent an assertion of the Society's power and independence? A proud record of their ability to say no to the Inquisition, by that time perhaps the most powerful body of cardinals in the Catholic Church? Or is there something else going on? A second document contained in the same file as Rodriguez's letter hints at the latter. Written in July of the same year, the second report is a standard quarterly update written for circulation within the Society of Jesus, to edify and to instruct. The quarterly letter includes an account of an unfortunate episode that befell Rodriguez during his mission to the Kingdom of Naples. It reads, "A father was sent to the Kingdom of Naples at the insistence of the Cardinal Inquisitors for the conversion and instruction of some lands which are not only touched by heresy, but where almost everybody is a heretic. Through the work of this father, 800 people were brought back to the womb of the Church, with private conversations and public preaching. Moreover, God did a favour to the father, who was the principal instrument in this good work. Some devilish ministers had started putting it about in Naples that this father was acting in an office of the Roman Inquisition, a thing which is absolutely despised here, and without the approval of the royal court. The account goes on to tell us that Rodriguez was arrested because of these rumours and eventually freed by a sympathetic viceroy who begged him to return to the holy work that he had begun, giving him letters of approval and every favour. The report concludes stating that Rodriguez returned to his work and that afterwards another 80 were converted from their errors, even if this father did not work as an inquisitor, but that which is proper to our company, that is the Society of Jesus. One could read this story as an inspirational account of a decent, God-fearing Jesuit being saved from the repercussions of calumny to continue his holy work. A tale to inspire fathers working across the Roman province to continue their missions in earnest, even in the face of persecution. Nonetheless, when considered in the light of Rodriguez's own reports, two things stand out. Number one, the repeated underlining of the fact that Rodriguez went to Naples to work as a member of the society and not as an inquisitorial commissary. And number two, the second author's emphasis on how hated the Roman Inquisition was in the Kingdom of Naples. These two things are, of course, related. The emphasis that Rodriguez's chronicler places on how hated the Roman Inquisition was in the Kingdom of Naples, his allusion to the lack of popular and political support for the Holy Office, explains why both the author of the quarterly report and his subject, Cristobal Rodriguez, so emphatically emphasize Rodriguez's status as a Jesuit missionary, a pastor, a proponent of dolcezza, and not an inquisitor. This was, at least in part, an important public relations exercise. In the Kingdom of Naples, the reputation of the Holy Office was not just marred, but utterly blackened by violent inquisitorial interventions in the years immediately preceding Rodriguez's arrival in 1563. These collaborations between the Holy Office and state authorities, led by Viceroy Pietro Afan Ribera, saw the violent repression of Valdensian communities in San Sisto and La Guardia. The Viceroy had ordered that the inquisitorial commissary in Naples proceed against the heretics with the ends of justice. Those who persisted in their errors were executed, their homes were razed to the ground, the bones of their relatives were dug up and burnt. Arriving at the close of one of the most sanguinous chapters in the history of the Italian Inquisitions, Rodriguez would have enjoyed little success soliciting conversions as a representative of the Holy Office. Capitalizing on the Jesuits' reputation as teachers, preachers, and confessors, and using papal privileges that allowed them to work autonomously, Rodriguez could convert and reconcile heretics without exciting the fear associated with inquisitors who had caused such problems in the very recent past. Although his report states that any judicial matters would be left to local bishops, it is documented that Rodriguez was personally involved in the reconciliation of heretics in Volterra on this mission and during later interventions. Indeed, a memorial that refers to these reconciliations, now held at the Jesuit archive, mentions Rodriguez explicitly. Reverend Father Cristoforo Rodriguez, Doctor of Holy Theology and Commissary of the Holy Office of Rome, who was in the Diocese of Volterra. Rodriguez was a Jesuit missionary, but he was also a direct collaborator with the Holy Office, working hand in glove with the General Commissary of the Roman Inquisition, Michele Ghislieri, deftly crossing the lines between Jerezza and Dolcezza. This was a classic strategy of good cop, bad cop. It was a strategy that would become typical of collaborations between Ghislieri and Rodriguez on later inquisitorial missions in the Kingdom of Naples and in the Papal States. On a mission to La Marche in 1567, Ghislieri, by then Pope Pius V, would instruct Rodriguez to use preaching and teaching as a means of gaining the trust of the people with whom he engaged. Rodriguez could then mine them for information about local heretics, which would then be sent directly to the Inquisition in Rome. As the Sommo Inquisitore, Ghislieri became a key ally for the society during the late 1550s, When Pope Paul IV's challenges to the Jesuits' independence and papal privileges coincided with Ghislieri's ascendancy at the Holy Office in Rome. The Jesuits provided a valuable service to the Holy Office, but this was a relationship of mutual benefit. When the Society's privileges to absolve heresy were curtailed by Pope Pius IV, Ghislieri fought successfully to have them reconceded. It seems that, at times, the power of the General Inquisitor could be more influential than the will of the Pope. But Ghislieri's power and the Jesuits' dependency on their alliance with the Cardinal Inquisitor could also limit what the Society was able to achieve, converting heretics on the ground. When Father Pietro Ribadinera sought advice about absolving heretics in Genoa, for example, he complained that the action sanctioned by Ghislieri actually limited the powers of absolution granted to the Society by Pope Julius III. The Jesuits worked as papal commissaries to ecclesiastically impoverished islands, as missionaries to princely courts at which Rome struggled to gain influence, and on official missions for the Holy Office, where strategies of hard justice had failed. The various roles assumed by the Jesuits in the fight against heresy involved collaboration with a broad range of powerful individuals and institutions, not just Michele Ghislieri. Whilst working under an authoritative superior general in Rome, the Jesuit missionary often had to juggle collaborations with secular and ecclesiastical authorities. This could be a tricky game to play. In 1562, Bobadilla would upset the delicate balance that the Jesuits needed to maintain in order to serve God, Church, and State in their far from straightforward mission to save souls. Working in the town of San Sisto, Bobadilla had the approval of the Viceroy to absolve numerous heretics, simple souls who he believed had erred out of ignorance and were now genuinely sorry. Michele Ghislieri would not approve. Although the Holy Office did not have any official jurisdiction over matters of heresy in the Kingdom of Naples, the Jesuit superiors in Rome took the stance of the Cardinal Inquisitor over that of their own missionary and the supportive Viceroy. Chiding Bobadilla, Superior General Lainez tells him that in future he is never to deviate from the will of the Holy Office. Anticipating Ghislieri's wrath, Lainez swiftly followed his letter to Bobadilla with a note of apology to the Cardinal Inquisitor, damage control to ensure good relations with their longtime collaborator and the future Pope. As pastors, the Jesuits offered a relatively benign face in the fight against heresy, whilst their papal privileges to absolve heretics allowed them to work autonomously, keeping a clear institutional distance from the Holy Office. The idea of a two-tiered approach using both justice and pastoral methods to convert heretics was certainly not peculiar to the Jesuits. In fact, the success of the Society's interventions in the defense of the faith relied upon a widespread acknowledgement that in order to confront the complex problem of religious rebellion, in the very context in which it occurred, one must employ a range of approaches. Nonetheless, as a single organization, the Jesuits demonstrated a particular skill for negotiating the boundaries of durezza and dolcezza. It is for this reason, I would argue, that it is so difficult to discern a coherent strategy across the anti-heretical endeavors of the early Jesuits. Combating a misdemeanor that could be both a sin and a crime, the strategies of individual Jesuit missionaries and their superior generals in Rome were largely contingent on the circumstances in which they found themselves and the people with whom they had to collaborate. It was this flexibility, the willingness and ability of this new religious organization to work across secular and ecclesiastical infrastructure and to act autonomously when necessary, that made the Jesuits such a valuable asset for addressing a crisis that transformed the spiritual, social, and political landscape of early modern Europe. It was a service that required both independence and obedience, and a flexibility of practice that could infringe on the Jesuits' ideal way of proceeding. As Superior General Diego Lainez once wrote, this was work that was pio, frutuoso, e odioso, pious, fruitful, and often hateful, all at the same time. Thank you.